Welcome to Special Stage Rally Stories. In this series, we've been bringing you a flavour from behind the scenes and I guess behind the helmets of some of the people that have made our sport so special over the years. And every now and again, we stumble across somebody who has a few special cars that sit prominently in people's memories as well. And today's guest is definitely one of those. Welcome to Special Stage. Once again, Phil Collins. It's lovely to see you again.
Thank you, Paul, for taking the trouble to come down and chat and relive these memories, which is, some of this stuff is a long time ago now, but it's not so difficult to recall because it was also so much fun.
Ayrton Senna famously once called you a nutcase, but that wasn't in a road rally Ford Anglia, was it?
No.
But it all started a long time before that, didn't it?
It did, yes. I guess I had motorsport in my blood from a very early age. My father used to regularly go up to Silverstone, and I went up there as a kid from 4 years of age, I guess, and I'd sit up on the little rostrum that we used to build and avidly watch the Formula One cars of their day or the Grand Prix cars of their day as they were then, and then saloon cars, and I remember the Minis and the Zodiacs and all that stuff from way back then. My father actually in 1959 started jalopy racing, as it was then. He and 6 others. And it was Dad's idea to go and have at a local show in little old vouchers to have a race with 6 old cars. And so I was only about 10 and I used to go and help him set up the track. And then he had this little old Ford Popular and so that became the way. And then that jalopy racing morphed into something that sounded a bit more modern, autograss racing, and I started racing that. One day on the grass, I spun the car. It was a Rover V8 rear-engined special.
Wow.
With a Volkswagen Beetle gearbox, which was de rigueur for the sport in those days. And the thing was quite quick, it was light and it was terrific fun. But anyway, the water cart had broken down and it wet some of the circuit. I touched the water, I spun, a car came in the side and impacted my rib cage. I couldn't speak. I went like this, and no marshals came to me because the other guy was squealing. He'd cracked a couple of ribs on his safety belt. So I actually couldn't make any sound because he completely exhausted the air from my lungs. So I scrambled out, hit the ground, grabbed a bit of air, and then they realised I was in trouble. I'd actually broken 8 rear ribs, 6 of them in 3 places, punctured the lung. Off to hospital, drained the blood from the lung, and then I raced again 5 weeks later, which was all pretty stupid, but that's the way it was. And I still have a dent in the back to this very day, but it doesn't hurt me. So I felt side-by-side race cars, and there were a lot of accidents in those. I thought, do you know what? I went to watch the Wydeen rally, and I remember Donald Heggie in that red Escort, and I thought, wow, this. I like the look of this, and so I went and bought myself an RS 2000 a couple of weeks later, and said I'm going to go and try rallying. So the first event was on Epint, and we were seeded car number 80, and we'd been up there and had a little look around the stages, but. As I said to you earlier, the lad Jeff Smith who was sat with me, we're just lads. We didn't have a clue. Neither of us, we'd done the odd road rally, but pace notes were a pretty foreign experience then, and so we just drove it as we saw it. And, on the first stage, I caught and passed 3 cars and caught the 4th at the finish. What's the matter with these guys? And by half time we were 8th overall,
and you were seeded
180 on that event, and I'm mixing it with people who I used to read about it in the Motor News every week, and David Stokes actually won the rally, and
this is 79.
This was 78. And I absolutely got bitten by the experience, and we ended up 10th. Jeff Churchill and Frank Pearson were behind me. They'd been off or had a puncture or something, but I held 10th place, top 10. I came back shaking my head in disbelief. I didn't think a grown man could have so much fun with his trousers on.
And there we go, the rally world heard the name Phil Collins for the first time.
And actually, you say that, I was standing there, Grey Stokes was where they used to have the service area, and there was a little shop there. And rather than computerized results on your telephone, it was a piece of wallpaper and a felt pen. And I'm looking at this thing, and Jeff's gone in to try and resolve what we thought was probably a mistake, because there was no way we could be 8th overall. And I'm there in jeans and a T-shirt. You know, I didn't have a race suit, didn't have to wear one. And a lad stood by the side of me with his race suit on and his little racing gloves tucked in his belt. "You won't watching the rally, are you?" I said, "Well, no, I'm actually competing." "Oh, how are you getting on?" I said, "Well, I think the organisers have made a mistake." I said, "They're showing us as 8th overall and we don't think that's possible." "Oh, Christ, are you this Phil Collins they're all talking about, is it?" Well, I felt 8 foot tall, didn't I, you know? And so suddenly somebody's talking about me, and it was a fabulous experience.
Well, people have been talking about you for quite a few years following that, weren't they? So where did it go from there?
I then bought, I wanted to be in a class that was competitive, so we went and bought a Mark II that was a 1600 BDA. It was a Formula Atlantic engine, screamed like hell, slipper pistons, not an ideal rally engine, all top end, but it was a fantastic thing, make a lovely note. And we went up to the Lakeland stages, as it was then, became the Malcolm Wilson. And it had been snowing, and they used Greystokes a couple of times. We were seeded car number 105, so we're really back in amongst the slow stuff, and we're catching cars. And so we got to halfway, not having a clue where we were, and we'd got our stage time total. And there again, with another piece of wallpaper and a felt pen, were these results. And Robin Farrington was leading it in the Mark II, and we were on the same stage times as him. You know, so leading it from car 105. This is crazy. But actually, Jeff hadn't understood the rules properly. He'd been clocking in early because of overtaking these cars. He'd read a rule about penalties between main controls, misunderstood it, and we'd got 20 minutes road penalties, so we were actually classified 112th. But we went through the prize giving and the table, and all the trophies were laid out there, and there were 2 magnums of champagne. It's only when we got home next day that we realised those magnums of champagne were for the fastest times in Greystokes, and we got both of those, although the second one was tied with Nigel Worswick. I remember that. You remember Nigel back in those?
Yeah.
He was in I can't remember, RS18 or whatever it was. And so, anyway, you know, our name was out there a bit, and we started doing more and more of those BTRDA events. The car was a bit unreliable. And we finished 2nd overall. No, 3rd overall on Eppint, in amongst John Price. And there was a guy called Neil Jones who was in the TR7 V8, and we were in this little 16 and we'd beaten him. And
what names were you competing with on your first few rallies?
Yeah, that's right. David Granger, where the RS 1800, he comes second, and you know, here we are from nowhere in amongst all of that. So it was just bliss. It was so much fun.
Yeah.
And all very memorable stuff. But it's a long time ago now.
That era of the sport gets rally enthusiasts like me chattering. We love it, don't we, as a sport?
Yes.
We both revere that era.
Yes.
But we also go back to it as a kind of, this is where it all really started to gather momentum.
Yes, that's right. It didn't begin there. But the advent of a BDA engine, or even a twin cam, the noise, the revs, particularly the BDA, you know, as soon as you start taking an engine to 9,000 RPM, it's a note that's irrepeatable today, which is why so many people enjoy watching historic rally cars, because it's a noise, it's sideways. I remember watching Hanna Mikkola and Ari Valtonen on the Castrol stage, as it was then. They were precursor to the RAC. And I just started dabbling with it a bit, and we went up there to watch that. And I was in Havron, and I saw those 2 cars, those Eaton Ale Escorts, and I thought, this is impossible for anybody to drive this fast without knowing the roads. And about the same time, Roger Clark was interviewed on television one night, and whoever was it might have been Barry Hinchliffe, you know, Roger, how do you get to your level in a sport when it's a difficult sport to practice? He said, if you have the talent and you have the money and you can do a rally every 2 weeks, after 2 years you start to get quick. Now, most people struggle to understand that, but I did. I found I'd probably get, in the early days, get one corner right per rally. You'd thrown it in, it tightens more than you thought, your line was right, and you got away with it. And then after a few more rallies, you'd probably get a corner right every stage. And then as you progress again, you get to their level, and you get most corners right. And that's why the people couldn't keep up with him. I remember Hannu Mikkola about that time. He was leading the RAC either that year or the following year. And he was leading by over 11 minutes. And Barry Hinchcliffe interviewed him. He said, Hannu, it wasn't a motorhome, it was a sitting on the step of a transit van eating a sandwich. Hannu, you're leading this rally by over 11 minutes, and yet you look so relaxed. What is your secret? And Hannu, being the modest chap that he was, he thought about it and he said, I do not know. One man is quicker than the other. I don't know what the others are doing. It was just a lovely answer from a man who was so ultra talented. Him and Harry were on a pedestal at that time.
Yeah, real gentleman, but to be actually competing among them in that.
Yes.
At this point, did you have any kind of design on a rally career at all?
No, it was just fun and hobby, and I loved it. But I started to see that maybe, I could make a mark here.
And already had, indeed.
Yes, in those early days, but local and stuff, but you're starting to get noticed, and it means a lot. You pick up the comics, and you see your name mentioned and all of that, and a lot of local people were following and interested in motorsport, and so got a lot of attention. So all that's a feel-good factor.
There was a big social element as well to rallying in those days, wasn't there?
Oh, I mean, now it almost seems non-existent, but in those days, that nobody went home the nights after the rally. And we used to have all these games going on, and I remember I used to lead the bottle walking, which was well remembered at the time, a couple of bottles and falling over and drunken and all of that stuff that just made it so much fun.
And at that point, you could hardly have imagined the impact you would have on the sport.
No, I guess not. But you don't notice that, you don't think about that. You're just making your own way, and you're having your hard luck stories. We all have mechanical failures. I had more than my fair share of accidents. And so, I got to a BDA level. I bought my first 2 litre, and I bought it off a lad called Dave Lampitt, who traded as spec fab up in Pershore. And he built this car for John Buffum to do the Open Championship. But somehow the deal didn't materialise, a sponsor pulled out, and the car was built with no engine or gearbox. And I think it was £7,600, and he'd done an immaculate job. The workmanship was perfection. And I went to see it, and as ever, having cut my teeth dealing with farmers, you've got to have a deal, so. But there was nothing to criticise the car for at all, apart from the fact that, Dave, why have you painted it red? You ever see a slow fire engine, he said. And I stayed red from thereafter, I used to buy Venetian red, buy the 5-gallon drum. And
brilliant. Apart from famously one era, but we'll come to that.
We'll come to that. I didn't have the choice in that one. So I went through that sort of BDA, BTRDA championship stuff, competing with Trevor Smith. I lost my driving license at the start of 1 year because of a points situation, so I missed the first rally. I actually did, dare I declare this on television, I did the second rally with no driving license. I told them I got it back and nobody bothered to check.
No online checkers in those days, were there?
And so I steady run to second or third place, whatever. And then I won a few rallies, but I never won the BTRDA championship. I'd come so close. Trevor Smith was my nemesis. We had great fun with Trevor, and we were, tit for tat all the way through it. And obviously there were others about, but me and Trevor were great mates and great competitors. That was a great period. And then I decided to step up to the national championship and did some of that. And then Malcolm Patrick won the national championship in 1983, so I bought his Opel Ascona and set about the national championship with that. It was
What
a good
glorious
car.
cars they are.
Fabulous. And whilst it didn't have the scream and the rev, especially that the Ascona, the engine wasn't, top of the range, but the handling. And I remember the tapered wire barrel-shaped springs that Karl-Heinz Goldstein had designed for the Opel team when he was their chief engineer. And that car would absorb bumps like so much. The Escort, the springs, the damper rates were too soft. The suspension travel was very short, so it'd hit the bump stops and fly up in the air. And I didn't understand enough about it as I developed with my modified Mark II Escort up on this picture here that I used to go to Ireland with. We had a lot more travel. I understood it all much better. But those tapered wire springs were phenomenal. That Opel would glide over bumps so well. And we got some sponsorship from Shell and from GM, but the sponsorship increased if I got a Manta, so I ended up building an old Vauxhall Cavalier into a Manta. And I went over to Ireland and copied Bertie Fisher because I couldn't afford the matter roll cage and the bodywork, so we did it ourselves in our own workshop, and it was a carbon copy, but it was home built.
There's a great photo of you on the prize giving. I think it's the Welsh, and it's on one of your boards.
Yes.
And you've got the Shell Opel colours on your sleeves on your sweater.
And I'm pretty sure that photograph is when Rog and I were kind of a 16 and we finished 4th, and the rally was won by Bjorn Valdegaard in a Quattro. Henry Toivonen was 2nd. Stig Blomqvist was 3rd, and actually I'd been beating Stig on quite a few stages, and after stopping in a stage for 2.5 minutes to change a tyre in the dark, we still finished 4th. And there were, all the gaggle of national championship, Chris Lord and a number of those guys, Francis Tuthill, names, that were around that time. We managed to get, after this puncture, we got past all of those, and it was just terrific. That was I remember the Metropole Hotel presentation, and the cheer went up for the local boy. It was very memorable to be there in amongst those guys in a Mark II Escort with Yokohama tyres, which weren't the greatest. But
they just sound like wonderful times. The hairs are on the back of my neck, imagining that local boy among all those big names of the sport.
Yeah, I remember Henry and and Jimmy rolled the car. I remember Jimmy rolling his Opel on the new road, and Ian Grindrod having to go back to this smash car that they thought was about to burst into flames because he had to get back into the car, get his fags. There was a pilot, why are you going back to the car? You go, we've got to have my fags. Good old Grinny.
The days when you could, I won't say easily, but you could reasonably compete with a works team.
Yes, you could. The cars weren't, the differences now is mega and completely unachievable. And it's a pity. And I read the John Hoglan story in the Motorsport News the other day, and he talked about how he would like to see the World Championship WRC2 and give those, and it would bring other manufacturers into line. Having just 3 manufacturers at WRC level, it's not what it should be, and it hasn't been what it should be for a long time. And everybody's aware of it. It's the elephant in the room. But if you brought it back to cars that were worth or costing 300,000 or 400,000 euros, it would make a huge difference.
We have some very well-heeled colleagues of yours out there fighting the cause now, don't we? Dave Richards is out with Robert Reed, and they're leading this steering group. So hopefully we'll get some inspiration back in there.
For any good competition, you need lots of competitors. You don't want to just, I wonder which of the 3 it will be this weekend. It's usually far too predictable.
But we also need to put the ambition and the inspiration back in, don't we? So that people like you at this point in your career can see a way of actually moving up the ranks, rather than, to get in one of those multi-million pound Rally 1 cars, I've got to be one of 3 people in the world.
That's right, and if they're pragmatic about it and they've got enough people with enough wisdom about it, they can see that the choice starts to become bankruptcy or success. The risk is too big, and they pull out. There was no point. I cannot achieve that. There are no gaps. There are no seats. If there were 10 or 12 good cars from 4 or 5 different manufacturers, it would be a much better sport to follow.
So let's go back to when it was.
Yes, a great sport to follow.
A great sport to follow. And so you're at this stage in a Manta.
I was in the Manta, the national championship, and
You come fourth that year in the national championship.
no, we came second. Di Llewellyn,
Was it the first time?
probably the first.
Yeah.
I may have, yes. I had a few hard luck stories, and then the second year, Di Llewellyn came along and was hiring my Opel Ascona. He got a bit short for money at the end of the year, and we were on the Kielder, the Pirelli as it was, or the forerunner of that. First car on the road, I think, was Tony Pond in a Metro, and Pondy went over this crest, and it was a fire break, and there was a big hole, and the Metro went into the hole, but it's 4-wheel drive and it came out of the hole. The next car along was Malcolm Wilson, the Quattro, and he did exactly the same thing, because the road went left and it was over a crest. You couldn't see it unless you knew about it. And that car was a 4-wheel drive, and guess what it drove out? The next car was Louise Aitken Walker in her Sierra that RED prepared. It was but it was a 2-wheel drive car, and she got stuck. And the next car is me, and I come over the crest, and I went smack in the back of Louise. And the next car was Di Llewellyn, who was in a Nissan. He'd used a Nissan for that with Roger Evans. And all I'd got to do was finish the last 2 rallies in a respectable place, and I'd won the national championship. Di was next car along. Am I going to let him run into the back of my car, or am I going to go up and point that the road goes that way? So over he came, and I pointed, and he went round the corner. And Roger Evans looked down over the bank at me in the back of Louise's car, and he said it's going to take more than a bucket of water to separate those two. And I went on and won the national championship. So, c'est la vie. Near misses, hard luck stories.
Yeah, indeed.
And so at the end of that season, I then went on, did a year in the in the Open Championship with the Manta, but it was very underfunded and no big sponsors, and very difficult to be right at the sharp end. And then we discovered this Securicore Sierra Challenge was going to happen. I thought, I'd quite like to be involved in that. So I got in touch with Brooklyn, and Mike and Tim came straight down the following day, and we agreed terms, and I drove their car, and it was an absolute joy. But of course the car was brand new.
I love it when we get to the point in these stories where the start of what became quite an iconic relationship deal starts. I love when we hit those moments.
Just what am I going to do here? I rang Peter Ashcroft. I said, Peter, I see that this is happening. I'd like to be involved. Phil, we'd like you to have you involved. Actually, the conversation went, I said, well, my nearest dealer is Brooklyn. He said, I think Louise is going to drive that car. And then somebody else said, no, I don't think she's going to drive that car because she's doing something else. I can't remember what it was. So I thought, well, there's not much to lose. So I made the call, and they came down, and no, they hadn't had any communication with Louise. That wasn't true. So I drove the car, and we actually got the car ready. We did the Gwynedd. Nobody else had got the car ready in time.
These were Group N
These
cars
were
in the Securicore-ish.
Sort of ish. Yeah. Shopping cars, I think, would be with big tyres would be a closer, better description. So, all very basic, and we looked at the obvious things that might break, but anyway, the front strut broke on the Gwynedd. We needed 2 or 3 stages, and that came off, and we learned a bit about it and how to drive it. And of course, I'd never driven a car with a turbocharger on before, so there was quite a lot of lag on that turbo. It wasn't like the T4 in Andy Rouse's car, but nevertheless, there was quite a lot of lag, and it was very early stages of the technology of turbochargers, and lag was always the issue. So you have to start to learn to left foot brake to keep the old turbo spinning and all of that.
Anyone who's driven a Cosworth road car will know the old turbo lag.
And so then this challenge began in earnest, and we went all the way up to the Granite City, and we did about 3 or 4 stages, and bang, broke the rear diff. So we parked under a tree for the rest of the day and scored no points. And Chris Mellors and Trevor Smith and Dougie Watson-Clark and Kenny McKinstry, I can't remember what the order was, but you know, they got through. One or two others, I think, broke a diff on that same event. I can't remember who, but we were at a disadvantage from the start because there were only 5 events.
What was the prize for these?
The prize was an
Challenge?
assisted drive in the following year's Open Championship. So that was a terrific prize because I tried to do that in the previous season in my Manta, all a bit half cocked, but suddenly there was an opportunity to do this.
And that's ambition, you know. That
sure.
fact that you know, winning a championship gets you a leg up for sport and your career.
Absolutely,
we miss that, don't we? We're missing
yes. That. And it was a proper leg up, you know. And okay, Ford were the might of rallying at that time in this country, and you know, the enthusiasm in their management team was there, whereas a lot of management teams in production vehicles today, they wouldn't have any interest in the sport. Those guys did, and Peter Ashcroft, Stuart Turner, John Griffiths, all of those guys had rallying through their blood veins in the same way that we did, you know. So anyway, we did the Granite City, but we failed. We then went. The EPAS was cancelled. I think there was an argument about the homologation of the cars. I can't remember what that was. But anyway, it was cancelled. I think the next rally was the Manx, which was my game on tarmac. And I just prayed the guy held together, and it did, and we won it. We were actually second overall in the rally. Willie Rutherford won it in a Metro. And we were sort of thinking, wouldn't this be great if that Metro was to break? Because they did break sometimes. And we could actually win an event in it. But anyway, that didn't happen. Willie drove a very good rally. And we come second, so that was terrific. And then I think they called it the Port Talbot stages, but Swansea event, which I'd done a few times before. And we were probably in the 3rd stage, whatever it was, and suddenly lost every gear bar 4th. Now, 4th gear was straight through. This was a very high-geared car and a high-ratio diff. So 5th gear was an overdrive. 4th gear was and that's all that worked. So it was slipping the clutches to get around tight corners, and we crawled out. We dropped 2 or 3 minutes, but we got through. We got the service area, and Brooklyn, Mike and co hadn't got a spare gearbox. They'd been trying to get one, couldn't. But somebody said Rob Stoneman had got one. And his dad was there, and we approached him. He said, well, you'll have to wait. And if Rob comes in all in one piece and he doesn't need our gearbox, you're welcome to have it. And that was the sort of camaraderie that existed between those teams. They're all Ford teams. They all knew one another. Yeah. And there was a terrific bunch of people. And that added a lot of value to it. So we got the gearbox out. There was no choice. We were going to go and in came Rob, no problem, have the gearbox. And away we went. And we got back up to second. A lot of other people had troubles that day. There were a lot of long stages on the event. And so we'd started to got a few points on the board now, and then the next event was the Mueller, I think. Yes, it was the Mueller. Yes, that's right. And of course, tarmac again, Mueller, you know, I did have the advantage of knowing Epping much better than anybody else did, so that was terrific.
Right back to where it all began for you.
We were second. I think I got that wrong about the Isle of Man. I think we were 3rd in the Isle of Man, but we were second. We were second on the Mueller. But anyway, we won the championship. We won maximum scores. So we went to the Lindisfarne dead equal on points with Chris Mellors. Chris had scored his points over the 4 rallies, and I'd scored my points over the 3. And you know, we'd been lucky enough to go well enough that on average we just about had the edge on Chris. And so I went in there feeling pretty confident, having never won a championship before. This was a big prize. And above all else, I mustn't make a mistake. So Roger Freeman with me, and Roger was a very good co-driver. But Roger, that day, we said, look, Roger, we must make a mistake. And he was reading me his map so much earlier than he should. You know, there would be a hairpin, and he'd be reading this out 200 yards before we get there. And I'm suddenly hesitating, you know, don't make a mistake. We did our first 3 stages, and I came out, I was 14 seconds behind. I'm pretty sure it was 14 seconds behind Chris. And I thought, I have cocked this up again, because I'd misjudged it. You know, I thought I didn't have to drive flat out. I was wrong. Chris was driving very well that day. So, wow, I've blown this. Anyway, service. We went out to the next stage. We're sitting on the start line. It was a long stage, 17 miles. And I said to Rog, give me the map a minute, Rog. Why? What do you want the map for? I said, just let me have a look at the map. I just want to get a feel for this stage. You know, we've been too cautious and I don't want to go crazy. He gave me the map. I took one look at it, I folded it up and I threw it behind his seat. What are you doing? I said, this map's no good to me, Rog. I'm going to drive this blind. Just leave it to me. Hold tight. And let's see what happens. Oh, this is crazy, this is stupid. I said, very likely, but we ain't going to win the rally the way we're going on now. And I pretty much put all this time back on one stage. And then the last 3 stages, we won by 10 seconds. It was a 10-second gap at the end of the day. And we won the championship, you know, and it was all because of that. And I was used to driving blind. You know, I've been driving blind all the way through that Mark II Escort stuff. The maps were only and I'd never had a proper co-driver. John Savage for a while, he was a very good co-driver, and I just cut my teeth on driving blind. Just let me get on with it. And going back to Ari Vartnen and Hannu Mikkola, driving those stages and as they see it, and just keep going and throw the car in and just steer it on the throttle and pull it in. And so that was terrific. That was after non-scoring on one of the events to win that, and then to be given a budget to do the Open Championship.
What on earth did Roger say at the end of that stage?
He shook his head in disbelief. You're nothing but a bloody nutcase, probably. But it was just terrific. And then we did the York stages in the car. And anyway, we went on then the following year and did the Open Championship, which was a great experience.
And that's where I think a lot of rally drivers have an era, or in your case, a car that defines them. And like it or not, when people mention Phil Collins, and people like me, I've even brought my Corgi model for you to sign. People think of the pink Sierra.
Yes.
And it wasn't always pink, to be fair, was it?
It wasn't. It was blue and white. It was the colours that Chris Hodgetts used to use when he was doing the touring car championship, and they carried that forward for the first year. And then there was a company called Tangram, and we added this blue and orange stripes on it. And then suddenly, I think it was for the RAC at the end of that first year, when George Foster, their managing director, rang me up and said, Phil, we've got a new sponsor for the RAC. Oh, terrific, that's great, George. Yeah, that was 10 grand. The only one issue is they want to paint the car pink. They were a carpet manufacturer, Mr. Tompkinson. I said, oh, okay, but well, that's okay, but George, please don't ever ask me to wear pink overalls. And about 20 minutes later, an awkward phone call, Phil, I'm sorry, it looks like they want us to, whatever, George, we'll wear them.
Brilliant.
And so we went out on that rally, and Di Llewellyn had, I knew Dave very well, and I'd worked with him on pace notes, and I'd introduced a numeric system of pace notes, which Di adopted. So he, because he was driving the Quattro, then he could go out and do the recce and write his own notes for those first 8 stages, what we used to call the Mickey Mouse stages. And in Clumber Park, there's a crest and then a bridge, and he had a right 5. Now, 90 degrees for Dave was right 5. For me, a right 6 was a square corner. Yeah. So I'm reading Roger reading his notes, and he calls it, long crest and right 5, which was a tighter corner than it would have been for me. So the tail end went out, we're very close to the curve, back the other way, and came to a standstill on the bridge. And of course there were bales either side of the straw bed, so I just couldn't get going, and I was 6 inches, I'm trying to 17-point turn, and people came and lifted, and of course the boss then that evening, the news at 10 said, and we're bringing you the RAC rally from Clumber Park, and there's Mr. Tompkinson emblazoned across the front of the television. News at 10 opening, this is unthinkable now.
Yeah.
And the boss of Mr. Tompkinson Carpets, I don't remember his name, but he didn't want to do this sponsorship. It was a waste of time. But he got a marketing guy that was very interested in rallying, and he was the one who persuaded him to do it. And suddenly he's watching the television, he cannot believe it.
And you wedged his
Yes.
company name between the bridge
You got
parapets.
it. And it was, so the following year he doubled the championship, doubled the sponsorship.
That's
But
amazing. Do you know, that's the story that when I posted a picture of the Pink Sierra on my Facebook the other day, knowing we were going to be doing this,
Yeah.
that's the story that so many people
Everybody
brought up.
remembers. So many people.
There were
And
people that were there
Yeah.
commenting on this, saying, I remember when he wedged it in the
Yeah.
bridge.
But the follow-up to that was we were having a meal a few hours later and Paul White came in and he said, Phil, you have caused me some serious shit. What's the matter, Paul? That bridge was the only part of the entire route that the insurance company would not cover because it was 16th century carved stone and it was going to cost a fortune to fix it. I got another insurance broker to take it on. We lined it with bales. We said all the cars are just going straight over. There's no fear of damage. He's just been on the telephone because he's seen you trying to do your 17-point turn. Oh, Paul, I'm sorry. Anyway, it didn't matter, obviously.
I don't think he damaged the stonework.
No, I didn't damage the
You
stonework.
might scratch the bumper, but...
Lifted it, the bumper was hanging off and away we went.
Aren't we lucky in our sport that a moment like that was shared on the news at 10 with the whole of the nation, but was shared with rally enthusiasts, is still something that people think of and talk about with a gleeful expression.
Yes.
If you were a football fan or a cricket fan, you wouldn't remember that
not.
wicket or that goal.
Of course not.
And that's what I love about this sport.
But that was a glimpse on the television that probably lasted 5 or 6 seconds. And here we are talking about it nearly 40 years later. Yeah. It is extraordinary, and so many others. You know, it's obvious that I'm going to remember it, and avid rally fans will remember it, but so many others do too. It's extraordinary.
Yeah. We are very lucky in this sport to have those kind of moments that we treasure. I love there's so many photos of the Sierra in those days. When I think of it, it's always sideways.
Yes.
In the photos, isn't it?
Yeah, well, of course. Those are the photographs.
They were so flamboyant, weren't they, those cars?
Yeah, that's right. That old turbocharged, once she came in, she was away. But, so we took the car, we did some Donegal in the car and went to Killarney. And
they looked incredible at tarmac trip, didn't they?
Well, they loved it. Ireland, because it was a little bit different. They absolutely loved it. And then of course, James Cullen went on and he hired the car from Brooklyn and did Donegal and Killarney.
Because it was still Brooklyn. It was
still Brooklyn.
It said Brooklyn
at the time.
Across the front wheel arch when James had it, didn't it?
Yes, he simply hired it.
Right.
And James was a very good driver and a great guy. So.
And regardless of possible reshells, we know what Works rally cars are like for being like Trigger's Brew. The fact that car, in whatever way, shape or form, came up for auction the other day and went for a good amount of money, and he's going back to Ireland.
Yes.
The amount of excitement generated by that car. An auction that, by the way, had ex-Grand Prix cars, it had World Rally cars, it had a road-going 205 T16, but the car that everyone was talking about
extraordinary.
Was your Pink Sierra.
I know. Just because of the colour of the paint. Well, almost.
Sorry, Gwyndaf, I know it was your car as well, but...
No, but he followed later. We'll get on to that in a minute. But so, one of the results of the year was the third place in the Isle of Man, and that gave us a B seed. So I was pretty excited. There was only 5 B seeded drivers in the year that year, Mark Lovell, Russell Brooks, Jimmy McRae, and please forgive me, whoever else I've missed, but probably Colin. Anyway, I was one of them.
Just let those names hang.
Malcolm would be the other one, of course. I'm sorry, yes, Malcolm is still competing there. And so I was B seed for the first time, and I was pretty proud of that. I was pretty excited about that. And we were due to get an upgrade on the car and everything for the following year.
How did the seeding thing work in that?
In that case, I got it because I was in top 3 of a European Championship event.
Right.
And there were, top 10 of a World Championship event. There were various ways of becoming B-seeded and the same for the A-seeded. It was a clear-cut criteria, and all I squeaked in with a third place.
And what would the B-seed mean to you?
Just seeded at the front.
It was just the seeding.
John Hogland was B-seeded, and he would usually be about 12th overall in the 1300 Skoda, and I would be running behind him in the Sierra. So, I would just be seeded in my proper place, because you couldn't get seeded in amongst B-seeded drivers. That was a clear criteria. So in amongst driving this Brooklyn car, we were also preparing cars, an assortment of cars, still Escorts and Mantas and all of this. And suddenly we got the inquiry, would we like to quote for running the Toyota for David Llewellyn, for Toyota GB and David Llewellyn to drive it? Well, obviously, knowing Dave and having a friendship and huge respect for his driving abilities, wow, this would be lovely to be involved in. RED had prepared the car for those first 3 or 4 events for Jimmy to drive, and they hadn't had any luck. They hadn't finished a rally. And I think Ford had said to RED clearly, if you want to carry on doing your Toyota stuff, away you go. But if you want to do any work for us, then you've got to drop that. Yeah. So we got the inquiry. I rang Mike Hill. I said, Mike, I've got this inquiry. I'd quite like to do it, but I don't want to jeopardize the drive in your Sierra. What do you think? He said, well, I'll have a word with Peter Ashcroft and we'll see what he says. And he came back to me and said, Phil, as long as you are not involved on the events and you can concentrate on what we're doing, then they're okay with it. Phew, blimey, thank you, Mike. That's terrific. So then we quoted it, then we got the job, then it's announced in Autosport, Llewellyn and Collins for Toyota, which was badly timed because on the Swedish rally, the car that was destined for Gwyndaf was used in Sweden with Stig Blomqvist at the wheel, and he rolled it and wrecked it. And they had made a promise and an agreement with Gwyndaf, and they hadn't got a car for him. This headline, guess what? Stuart Turner said, I know how we can get a car for Gwyndaf. We cannot have Phil Collins preparing Toyotas, driving our Sierra. Give his car to Gwyndaf. And then I got the message from Mike. And it was like somebody just chopped me off just below the shoulders. It was absolutely gutting, as you can imagine.
Yeah, I didn't realise
all that build-up to that, this is going to be my year, and then that. I tried to put something together, but it was hopeless. So I had no choice but to run this Toyota to the very best of our ability and make sure that I won the championship. And that happened. And we had a couple of years, and clearly the car was four-wheel drive. It wasn't very powerful. The engine wasn't terrific. It was water-cooled turbocharger, but it nevertheless, with its own reliability and die at the wheel, it was a very good car. And after a few teething problems, it became dominant. And we won the challenge. We built a new, but that was the refurbished RED car, and then we built a new one, and then another new one. And each time was better and better. And we were dominant. And Toyota got bored with winning because the battle wasn't there. We talk about WRC, there's a parallel there. Not quite the same, but so they pulled out of the championship, did a few events, sold the cars on, and the first car, the RED car, was sold to a Scotsman, and I'm sorry I can't remember his name, but he took it and did an Asian Pacific event in Indonesia, in Medan. And the president of Indonesia's youngest son, Tommy, saw the car. He liked rallying, and he bought the car, and he started doing events. And the car broke a gearbox. So we get a phone call, and we sent a man out there with a bag of spanners and some gears, and he fixed the car, and he came back, and we developed a relationship with him, working on these cars. And in no time at all, we started doing all sorts for them. There was they were building a new race circuit. I was out there for the weekend. We were looking after the rally car, and they're Phil, we build new race circuit for Formula 1 Indonesia. You must come and take a look. So they take me out there, and they give me the guided tour. And this strip of tarmac in a mud pool with concrete walls that actually aren't concrete, they're just weld mesh going rusty. And I've never seen, I'm in construction, I've been building stuff all my life, I have never seen so much chaos. I said, well, when do you expect to finish this? December, Phil. Bear in mind this was the middle of October. I said, what? Which December do you have in mind? In 6 weeks, Phil. We have first race. President coming to open. What? Are you serious? Yes, Phil. You must come. You must come and enter the race. I said, I don't have a race car. We get a car for you, Phil. Of course. You come. Oh, okay, but who's going to pay for all the flights? And, oh, Phil, we pay everything, of course. Okay. So I go home thinking I'm never going to hear any more about this at all. And then the phone, no, through the post, came an airplane ticket. And so I'm going out there on Wednesday, about the 2nd or 3rd of December, for this race weekend. I think, well, we'll go along for the ride, it'll be interesting. And then on the Friday morning, this is 5 days before I'm due to go, I get a phone call. Phil, can you get Escort Cosworth? I said, yes, I can get an Escort Cosworth. What do you want? Rally car, shopping car, race car? Phil, shopping car, but make look like race car. So what do you mean? Slick tyre, safety belt, and suspension. Oh, right. Get price. Roll cage. All right. So I ring around and I get a price together for these bits and pieces. So Friday afternoon, I have a chat to him. Phil, you get. Okay, we'll get it. When do you want it? Monday morning, Garuda flight. This is Friday afternoon. Roll cage, slick tyre, suspension, safety belt, Garuda flight, 9:30 Gatwick, Monday morning. Oh, for Christ. Ben, I'll give it a go. 22.5 grand the car was. I could buy it off a dealer, get the VAT back, so I got a few grand in it, so Dave Spec Fab roll, only a look-alike roll cage, not a proper thing, you know, just a hoop with a couple of legs, tyres and some red springs, and get on the... so next morning, 8:30 on Saturday morning, Phil, 2 car. Saturday afternoon, Phil, 3 car. What? Ben, stop. What is happening here? Why is this? Get me some money. What the hell? Phil, all car coming into Indonesia, if they more than 2 litre or turbocharged car, we pay 200% road tax. Tommy passed new law. Any car coming to the country for the race circuit is 25%. We do 1 race, Phil, then we sell, make big profit. And that was what it was. And I sold them 8 cars in a fortnight. And we were roll cages and turning up on flights because you had to take the water out of the engines or very concentrated antifreeze because up there, guess what, it's cold in the hold. So we got all that. So I ended up going there on the Wednesday with 3 cars in the hold of this Garuda jumbo jet. And then we ended up driving them out of the airport at 3 o'clock in the morning with false number plates on, because at 3 o'clock in the morning there would be a lower grade of customs officer who would take a smaller backhander to release the cars. So we're driving these 3 cars through the streets of Jakarta in the middle of the night. It reminded me of the Italian Job, those 3 minutes.
That's a great idea for a film, isn't it?
It was huge fun. And then we'd turn up and then the people that were buying them and the corruption that existed out there and the people that were paying, and there were businesses, and you guys, what have I got myself involved in here? It was an extraordinary experience.
2 things on my mind. Did the racetrack get built?
It did get built. It wasn't finished. It was nowhere near finished. And there were stands going up, and the car park was a bit of gravel and a bit of mud, but the tarmac had already been laid. But I always remember they were still building the stand, and there was a guy up on there. They'd got a steel rafter, and we make steel frames that got some cleats in the wrong place. And there was a guy up there dragging the cables behind him and welding and cutting them off, and there were sparks, and I could see this guy, obviously not a hint of any form of safety. I said, Benny, what happens if that man falls off that structure? Oh, no problem, Phil. 20 men want his job. That was all his concern. Not about what was going to happen to the guy, but who was going to weld the other cleats on, you know. And it just gave me a taste of how cheap life was out there then. Probably to an extent still is now.
I wonder if those Escort Cosworths still exist out there somewhere.
I'm sure they do. They'll be parked in a barn, and some of them will be wrecked, but we got out there, and I did some racing. I sold another guy an RS500 ex-Andy Rouse car, and I actually did the race in it because he couldn't, and the engine blew up, and Dave Mountune could go on for hours about that stuff, you know, but huge experiences and living on your wits. And another thing we did in the same era, David Ewells from Toyota got an inquiry from Toyota Malaysia, and so they wanted to buy a car, and it was right-hand drive. You know, obviously, everything coming out of Germany was left-hand drive, and they weren't interested in that sort of deal. So I said, would you build it? Yeah, we'll build a car. So we built the car, we sent it out there, and it was a bit lastminute.com, but 60 tyres and spare suspension, spare gearbox, a whole pile of stuff in a container, and we arrive out there, and I don't know anything. That was actually that was before the Indonesian experience, which in some ways were quite similar, because they were these dirt muram roads, which are very hard and very good to drive on when it was dry, but when the weather was wet, it was worse than ice. It was unpredictable as hell. But we were setting it up for an Australian guy to drive the car. And we got our lads standing at junctions to make sure that nobody on a moped or a Ferguson 35 tractor drove out in the road. We got about 1.75 miles of track. And one of the lads was standing down at a junction, and I'm on the radio. I'm in this air-conditioned Toyota Land Cruiser. Is everybody ready? Are we ready to go yet? The guy, we're ready to roll now. And Tony said, well, I'll be honest with you, Phil, I'm not very happy, he said. Why? What's the matter, Tony? He said, well, I've heard about these snakes. There's a lot of snakes out here. And I don't want to go home bitten by a snake. I said, excuse me, Tony. There's a guy by here, well-dressed, Indian heritage. I said, excuse me. One of my lads are concerned about snakes and the danger of bites, and does it happen? 25 years I work on this estate. Only 2 times I ever get anybody bitten by the snake. He said, both times we have the serum, we treat them, not a problem. Another old boy pulled up at the side of me. I said, told him the same story. Only last week, I working in plantation, a big black cobra. He get up, he frightened me. I said, I understand they have very poor eyesight. You have to stand still and he thinks you're a tree. No, I run like hell. I come back half an hour later, he's still looking for me. I don't like a snake at all. Tony had just been talking to a couple of local boys, no snakes in these parts at all. And I then went on and I said to the guy in charge of it, YS Kong, when he came over and he introduced himself to me, I said, YS, here you are, the Toyota Motorsport manager. I said, how have you managed to get to this achieved level? He said, Phil, for many years, I rally myself, and I 3-time Malaysian rally champion. He said, so I have been involved in the sport. 3 times you are? Yeah. I said, that's impressive. Yeah, but Phil, you might realise, in the Valley of the Blind, the man with one eye is a hero. And then again, a nice sense of modesty that you don't get very often. He didn't brag it up. So anyway, I said to YS about the snakes and the fears. And he said, Phil, you tell your boy if they see a snake, they man kill him. They take a stick, they stun him, and they give him to the local man. The local man hang him up, slit it open, and catch the blood in the cup and drink it. What? Why? They think to make safe malaria, Phil. What? I know, Phil, there are many funny beliefs. That's what the man believed. We have to go with that. Oh, okay, right, whatever. He said, you must realize, Phil, in these parts, people, for instance, they believe to be more clever. They must eat the brain of a monkey. I said, well, I sort of heard that, but I don't really believe it, Phil. I promise you, it happened. I see it with my own eye. I in Singapore. I young boy. I in Singapore. Big commotion. I looking for cheap food. Many people shouting. I go down the back street. What happened? I look, and all the people gathered around, and the table, big round table, 4 guys, and a monkey. And they put his head up through, Phil. And they put a candle under his bum, so he head right up high. They take the cleaver, Phil, they cut the top of the head off. No, don't tell me that, that's not true. But before they eat the brain, they put the wine in, they put the red wine, they suck with the big straw. No, I don't believe you. Phil, that was in Singapore. In Malaysia, we don't take all the brain. We leave maybe 25%. Then we sew the top of the head back on, put a crash helmet on him and call him a co-driver. Huge fun.
That took a mad tangent. So meanwhile, Gwyndaf's back in the UK.
I'm sorry.
Driving your car. That's great.
But yeah, while all that Toyota was going on, then clearly Gwyndaf had the pleasure of driving that big Sierra that was once going to be mine. and he had great success, and he won Ulster in the car, and
That's so frustrating for you.
yeah. But Gwyndaf was a very good driver. I mean, we were in the same team when he was in Group N and Group A, and he was clearly, he was a very good driver, and so you wish him well, and he did very well, and he went on with Ford, and he drove the Sapphire, and all of that followed. So
the rest is history, as they say.
Some of it's history, and some of it's still future with Elvin, of course. But it all came from there. And it's fantastic seeing Elvin do so well, and just those occasional hard luck stories that we can all relate to, which result in the near misses and the second places.
It's a very British rallying career, isn't it?
Yes, isn't it?
Isn't it?
It is.
We've had those feelings so many times, haven't we, over the years?
The near misses of life.
Yeah, in British rallying.
Yeah.
You go back to fun and moving away from monkey brain slightly, but and flitting around. I didn't promise anyone chronological order in any of this. But my dad said I had to ask you about Darrell Wiedner and your battles with him. You've had quite a few kind of nemesis over the years where it would be you and another driver that kind of battling it out. And Darrell Wiedner in Audi Quattro when you were in the...
I was in the Ascona and then the Manta. But yeah, Darrell came along and he'd got a big bag of cash, and he bought the ex-Mikola car, and clearly in the forestry it was dominant.
This is the white and blue clear light roof insulation, wasn't it?
I think that was his business.
Yes, it was, because my dad, he was a customer of my dad's.
Ah, there we are. So there's a connection.
He was a bit of a character, wasn't he?
Yes, he was, and we got on very well with him. But because he drove the car not as at the exciting level that Hannu and Stig Blomqvist drove them at, it was a little bit point and squirt.
Yeah.
Forgive me, Darrell, if you're watching. And I accused the car of not adding the fun and the competition to our national championship it was designed for. I felt a little peeved that a car that was so dominant should come along at a national championship level and do that. So I printed some T-shirts, red and yellow, and wrote on the back, "Quattros are boring," and that received a lot of... I'd sold those catalogs very quickly. But nevertheless, he came along and he won the championship, and the car was well run, and good luck to him. It was what it was, and then of course I moved on to this other stuff. So
fantastic.
So all of that, and then so all that Toyota stuff, and then it petered out. And I got to a point in my own career that there was nowhere for me to go in a proper rally car, and I was obviously getting a little bit older then, and so I packed up. I did a bit of racing. I did a bit of Fiesta racing.
Were you harbouring quite a lot of regret about the Brooklyn situation, or was it kind of water under the bridge?
Do you know what? It was water under the bridge, Paul. And I had such a ball with that Toyota experience that when I first felt they'd chop my arms off by taking the car away, within a year, you adapt to your situation. There's no point in, still thumping the desk out of frustration. We made what we could of that, and then those experiences abroad, we stuff in the Middle East, and the Indonesian and Malaysian experiences were almost life-changing experiences, because I saw I would never have gone to those places. Even if I'd gone there on holiday, you don't get a flavour of the way the government works, the corruption level that was so obvious, and anybody who did any business with them at all quickly discovered that. And it gave me a broader experience of the world, if I'm honest with you. So I certainly don't.
It's incredible that rallying took you to that place.
Yes.
Isn't it?
And there was a letter in the Hereford Times quite a few years ago. Somebody was objecting to a night rally going through their village and keeping them awake at night, and how it should be banned, and the wastage of fuel. And I wrote a response in there talking about, if we are going to ban every sport that uses up petrol, then we've got to certainly abandon all football matches, because people drive and ride in coaches to go and watch a big football match. So that quickly quenched that argument. But then I went on to talk about what rallying had given me, and so many people that I've known well through rallying and met, they add so much to your life, because most rally people are characters. They've got fight, they've got spirit, they've got talent. They know what it's like to fight hard for something that seems unachievable. And it has added huge value to my life.
Speaking of which, I started this by quoting that famous line from Ayrton Senna. Tell us about that, because that was a great feature.
Senna, it was Russell Bulgin who pulled this together. He knew Ayrton well.
And I must precursor this by saying you must have a look online for this article, because it is brilliant.
Yeah, and Russell was the motorsport and rallying journalist for the Car Conversions magazine, which was quite big in its day.
Oh, yeah.
So Russell got in touch with me. He said, Phil, I know Ayrton Senna. Ayrton would like to drive a rally car. Is there anything you can do to help organise that? So obviously I spoke to Mike Hill. He could quickly see it as a publicity, almost a publicity stunt, but certainly a way of giving Brooklyn, which is what they wanted, publicity. So we go up to Karna, where the Higginses have been running it for many years, and we met Ayrton in his Mercedes-Benz, and he didn't want to drive that down the bumpy track and through the stream, so he jumped in the Transit with us, and we're driving down the bumpy track and through the stream, and the tyres on the roof rack got caught up in the branches of the tree, and he's sat by the door. He's first out. Have you got a saw in there? Yeah, well, I think we have. And he's up on the side of the van. He's up on the roof rack with the saw, cutting the branches off. Right, let's go.
And he was what, by this point, a 2-time, 3-time world champion?
Yeah, but he got a lot of bad press. He was intolerant. And forgive me as a member of the press here, but we're all familiar with people who can sometimes ask pretty stupid questions. And Ayrton Senna would be subjected to those dull questions that he would, oh God, another, And so he wasn't as popular as he deserved to be if you measured him in talent. But that day we got to know him, and he was just a joy to be with. So we got 4 or 5 other cars. There was an Opel Corsa, there was Alan Edwards with that beast of a V8 Escort Mark III that he had, built by Phil Price Rally School. Sadly,
Was
poor
it
old Phil.
really?
Yes, Phil was his mechanic, and Phil built that car.
I didn't realise he built that car.
Of course, Phil's not with us anymore. So that was the connection there. So anyway, he's going to have a ride with me first. So we have this track, and I gave him a ride. And like anybody who's a passenger for the first time in a rally car, with so much sideways, for a man who would be used to being in total control, he felt that it was on the edge, and it was. I'm trying to make this thing count. I've got a man like him by the side of me.
Yeah.
I'm not going to poodle through there.
One experience.
So we take him a couple of times through there, and he gets out and da-di-da, and then he drives that, and he drives other cars. And the first time through there, he was very cautious, but but at the very first corner, he actually put it in the ditch. Because I said to him, it's not a race circuit, so why you go in tight, you go left, you do the Scandinavian flick as it used to be in those days. But he didn't do that at all. He just took a racing line, got on the gravel, and straight in the ditch up on our side. And that was a week before the Lindisfarne. I remember saying, we don't want to do any damage to this car today. But he drove all the other cars, and he got to know the track very well. And then he said, "Okay, Phil," he said, "it's my turn to drive you now properly." And of course he did, and it was poetry in motion. Such a naturally talented. Wow. And actually a very charismatic man. He was such fun that day. We saw a side of him we didn't really know existed, and then Russell put the story together in Car Conversions, and out it came with this quote that he used the first time he got out of the car, which plenty of people would say about any rally driver. We've all seen it, we know what it's like.
Yes, but Ayrton Senna saying it about you is pretty special, isn't it?
And I've got that story in a picture on my office wall, and he signed it to Phil. "Thank you for the lessons, Ayrton," which is a lovely thing to have, a lovely memento of that day. And yes, it's nearly 40 years ago, and I can still remember it really well. Yeah, a great experience. So all of that, and then in the latter days, I packed up. Rallying was behind me, and my brother was going to do the Wydeen. I said, "Well, you haven't got a car, John." He said, "I'm hiring a car off Pete Gerbis. In fact, I might buy it." So he went up to Phil Price's for a Sunday morning. He said, "You want to come along?" "Yeah, come along."
How long since?
This was 1999, I think.
Oh wow! So actually, what, 9?
10 years.
10
after
years.
It, yeah.
Wow.
I'd been without it. I'd survived. So I went up there and I had a ride with John, and I did a couple of laps around. I said, John, get out of there. Give me them handlebars and let me have a couple of laps. And I drove around there, and it was a fairly ordinary, I can't remember, Vauxhall engine, Mark II, whatever it was. But I just loved it. And it just brought all these sensations flooding back of what fun this sport is. So on the way home, I called in to see Roger Chilman, whose car I used to prepare for a cup of coffee. What are you doing up this way? I said, well, I'm up with John. He just bought a car. And he's going to do the Wydeen. Oh, you haven't bought a car? I said, why? Yeah, I got one out there I'm trying to sell. I said, really? Ooh, let's go and kick the tyres on that then. So with coffee cup in hand, we look around it, and it had got an iron block, naturally aspirated Sierra Cosworth engine in it. So quite a reliable tub, not that powerful, but a reliable thing. And it was half respectable, so we had a deal and I bought it and I started running again. And then I went to a Millington engine and bought another car and lightweight and more travel and Ireland, and I had another 21 or 2 years.
Yeah, well, you relived the Ascona.
Absolutely.
Again, as well.
I bought that Ascona off Neil James, and because I wanted to do some historic stuff, and I did a few.
You did the Roger Albert. Yeah, you did the Roger Albert.
Roger Albert, and Nicky sat by the side of me.
It
and
was
that,
great.
We had a few near misses hard luck stories in amongst them, and all of that, And I think the best result we had was 5th in the snow that time. And
did you do the Roger Albert in 2019?
no, that was later that. Or was it?
That was your last year competing.
It was when I broke the clutch.
Yes, that's right.
In Carlisle.
Yeah, that's stage 8 or something.
And I'll go back from there. That was November, December. I'll go back to June that year when I was in Donegal in the Red Escort. And the last couple of years, I'd started to lose pace. And it's not an easy thing to admit to yourself that you're not where you want to be. And I was in Donegal that year, and I was 10th overall in the national event. And I had won it once or twice and been right at the sharp end. And there's boys beating me where, and then I'm in Fannin Head. And a piece of road I can remember really well now. Very fast approach down. And there's a T-junction going off to the left. Down through the gears, accelerate away. 300, absolute crest. 300, absolute left. 150 tightens a bit to flat left. So it's now, we're flat out.
Yeah, we're motoring.
More or less top speed. And the road's about as wide as this settee, plus a foot maybe. And there are telegraph poles, and there are stone walls, and there's galvanised gates. And I'm on the flat left, and I noticed I was lifting. Hang on, I know it tightens a bit, but it's still a flat left. And I'm lifting. That is why those young men are beating you now, Phil.
Yeah.
And it was a moment of realisation that you eventually just, and the speed of mind inevitably, I'm 74 now, I was 70 then, your mind cannot function as quick as a 25-year-old who's down the gym 3 times a week and drinking orange juice and all of that stuff. And I had to confess that I wasn't really on it anymore, and I'm probably never going to be on it anymore. So we got the Saturday night, and we put several lots of water in the car. And at the end of the day, we put half a litre in the car. And we got 6 stages next day. And I thought, this is mad. I know we've got a head gasket gone here. This is a serious amount of water for a Millington engine, which just does not. Yeah. It does not. They're so reliable. Honest they are, Roy. They are so reliable. And so this is stupid. I'm going to do some damage. I don't want to spend the money. I'm 10th. I said, Ian, this is crazy. Put the car back on the trailer. We're going to pull out of the rally. Now, normally I would have been sat on the side of the trailer with my head in my hands. But within 5 minutes, I felt a weight off my shoulders. I felt a sense of relief that I was no longer in the rally. It was a very strange sensation. And I thought, Phil, your day's done, if that's the way you feel about it. So I did a few gravel events in the Ascona in the build-up to the Roger Albert, and I had Den Golding with me, and we broke the clutch in Kiel after driving all the way from South Wales up to Carlisle, and within 3 miles we'd broken the clutch and we couldn't fix it. We hadn't got the component. So we jacked it up and we missed a couple of stages, and yes, you could rejoin, but I'm driving it back into Carlisle with no clutch. So the traffic lights were there. I'm going round and round the roundabout, waiting for the traffic lights to go green so I could go through with no clutch. And I said, Den, you've just sat with me on my last rally. Oh, Christ, don't say that, boy. I said, no, this hasn't just happened, Dan. I've been thinking about this for 6 months. And the bit I missed was when I decided to pull out of that rally, where there was 6 stages left on the Sunday. A very good friend of mine has a daughter who I'm godfather to. And I said, and she was being confirmed the next day. And I said, Paul, if I go out of that rally, I will come home and I'll be there, not for the service, but for your cup of tea and the celebrations. I was 150 yards from the entrance to his house and the phone went. And it was Damien Crawford. Foul, have you heard? Heard what, Damien? Manus Kelly had just gone off through the hedge, hit that Hyundai and killed him. And there he was, a man who won the rally 3 times. He apparently also has 5 daughters, the same as me. He has a business in Letterkenny, employing 50 people, similar to me. I thought, this can happen to the very best. Do you know what? I think I'm done with this game. And that was, and then with Den Golding, and again, I wasn't really at the sharp end. Those last few rallies, I could tell. I wasn't really on the pace I wanted to be on, and I was never going to make up the numbers, so. 2 cars for sale. Let's go. That's me. Reliving the memories.
Wow.
The one thing we missed earlier was the experience in the Red Escort in 2007 when we were in Killarney. And I did Killarney and Donegal a lot, and they were fantastic rallies. And then we heard that Colin McRae was coming to Killarney. And this,
the whole world heard that.
This
was a big moment.
A joy to behold that he would be coming to what was almost a home rally for me, because I'd done it a lot. And suddenly Colin was going to come over there, but they wouldn't, somehow they couldn't reach a deal where he entered the rally. Because of some sponsor, I can't remember the reason why, but anyway, they allowed him to be course car. Now, in the build-up and the recce, needless to say, we'd had a meal and exchanged some banter with Colin. Obviously, I knew Colin very well. And I'd got Dermot Falvey, who's a local Irish boy who came to navigate for me. And we're in the car park of the hotel, and Colin's that side of the street in the Nissan garage, and the weather's a bit damp. We're making tricky tire choices, and Dermot's walking round and round in circles. I said, "Are you all right, Dermot?" She says, "No, Phil, no, I'm not. I'll be honest with you, I've never been this nervous since the first time I had sex," was what the man said. But we went up Moll's Gap. Now, Moll's Gap was stage I'd probably done 20 odd times. And Colin McRae, ex-world champion, had never driven the stage in anger. So I thought to myself, if there is anywhere in the world where I have a chance of taking a little bit of time out of Colin, this is my moment. And the cars were almost identical. They're both Millington engines. And so away we went. We come out of the stage. The marshals were telling us his times, and we'd taken 3 seconds off him. I was ecstatic. But then we went into Gortnagan, which is a stage I didn't know, because they ran it several times. I'd been through there the other way and all of that, but I didn't know the stage at all. Pace notes and drive, and we took 5 out of him. That was the moment. So we got back into service, and I walked down, and as I approached the back of the van, his co-driver, Derek, not Derek Ringer, had just told him that we were beating him. He's beaten us, is he? And at that moment I arrived at the back of the van. Colin, just come to make sure the car's all okay. You know, this is the way to get the message across. And he shook my hand. "Cons, you bastard," he said. "I heard you were quick. I didn't realise you were that quick." It was a huge moment. So then we went back out and did the same 2 stages again. I thought, now we'll see who's boss. So the second time at Moll's Gap then, Colin took a second out of us. Fair play to him, but only a second. And then we went into Gorton again, and we took 8 back. And Colin was great about it. We went right through the day, tit for tat, a few seconds one way or the other. But he was terrific. It was great. It was an experience they could never take away, you know. And then his car, something went wrong with the car the following day. And then, of course, we went to the Isle of Man. And it was in the wet. And again, we just had the edge on him on those 4 or 5 stages on that Friday evening. And then on Saturday morning, he came back at us. It was bone dry, and he'd got the feel of the car by then. And he got back to more or less on the same time as us, and then sadly broke his rear diff. I'd been telling him he should put a 9-inch diff in that Escort, but he was running on a 7.5-inch diff, and it broke. So we never actually finished either of those 2 rallies together. But it was a huge battle, and I was 56 at the time, so it was great kudos from me, a real feel-good factor to think that I could still drive at a very respectable pace.
There was a lot of chatter about it at the time. It was big.
It was, yeah. And obviously then, you know, the helicopter crash and all of that, it just made it all the more worse, you know. It was just awful. Such a waste. But
look at everything he did give us.
It was massive. And I always remember saying to Jimmy one day about Colin, you know, about his talents. And I said, what would he have done if he hadn't been a rally driver, Jimmy? I don't know what he'd done, he said, because, yeah, he could drive a rally car, but he couldn't really do anything else. You know, I think he had such a passion for it. Yeah. He'd never even envisaged a life outside of motorsport. When he'd grown up with his father doing all the stuff that he did and going to the rallies and then starting that little Talbot Sunbeam and all of that. But anyway, rest in peace, Colin. We carried his name on the side of the car from there on, right to the end. So, bless him.
You really took us with you on that adventure there, Phil.
Yeah, well, I hope it gave you a good flavour.
No, it did.
Start to finish.
It's in so many eras that we discussed there, but it's a story that we all lived, and I know people watching this will feel the same with that. There were bits of that I didn't know.
No, of course not.
And that's really special.
But it's a much more colourful journey, and there will be so many people who hopefully will watch this and people can relate to their own stories and their own experiences and things that have happened that would never have happened to them in normal, everyday business and family and friends and socialising life. You meet people, you go places, you experience, your back's against the wall, you've got to make decisions. And it just adds so much value to your life.
Rallying is life.
Oh, it's a great life. It's been a fantastic part of my life. Huge contribution to the life that I've lived.
Thank you for letting us tell your story, Phil Collins.
No, you're most welcome, and I hope it's of interest to a few people. The 5 or 6 people that will remember me from back those days.